The first mistake that could cost you your life was believing in spontaneous generation. The idea that life could spring from nothing. You might think this sounds ridiculous, but this belief dominated medical thinking for over 2,000 years, and its consequences were deadly. Imagine you're a doctor in the 1850s. You believe that diseases simply appear out of nowhere, that infections spontaneously generate inside the human body. Because of this belief, you see no need to clean your instruments between patients. You perform surgery with the same scalpel you used on a diseased corpse just hours before. You deliver babies with hands still covered in the blood of previous patients. This wasn't negligence. This was accepted medical practice. Doctors actually took pride in their blood-stained aprons, seeing them as badges of honor that prove their experience. The more blood and pus on their clothing, the more respected they were. But you, living in Louis Pasteur's world, would have been horrified by what you witnessed. Pasteur, through his groundbreaking experiments, proved that life comes from life, that microorganisms don't spontaneously appear but are carried from place to place. He showed that these invisible killers were everywhere, on hands, on instruments, in the air itself. Here's what Pasteur discovered that changed everything. He took 2 identical flasks of nutrient broth. One he exposed to air through a straight tube, the other through a curved, swan-neck tube that trapped particles. The straight tube became contaminated with microorganisms, while the curved tube remained sterile. This simple experiment shattered 2,000 years of medical dogma. But here's where it gets personal for you. This same mistake still happens today. How many times have you seen healthcare workers forget to wash their hands between patients? How often have you witnessed medical instruments that weren't properly sterilized? Every time this happens, you're witnessing the same deadly mistake that killed millions in Pasteur's era. The lesson for you is clear. Always ensure your healthcare providers follow proper hygiene protocols. Don't be afraid to ask if they've washed their hands or if their instruments are sterile. Your life could depend on it. Mistake number 2. Ignoring the invisible enemy. The second deadly mistake was refusing to acknowledge what couldn't be seen with the naked eye. In your world today, you take the existence of bacteria and viruses for granted. But in Pasteur's time, suggesting that invisible organisms could cause disease was considered absurd. Picture yourself as a surgeon in 1860. A respected colleague named Ignaz Semmelweis suggests that you should wash your hands with chlorinated lime solution between patients. He's noticed that doctors who perform autopsies and then deliver babies have much higher rates of maternal mortality than midwives who don't handle corpses. But instead of listening, you and your colleagues ridicule him. You're insulted by the suggestion that your gentleman's hands could be unclean. You're offended by the implication that you, a learned doctor, could be causing harm. So you ignore his advice, and women continue to die. This is exactly what happened to Semmelweis. Despite his evidence, the medical establishment rejected his findings. He was eventually driven to a mental breakdown and died in an asylum. Ironically, from an infection similar to the childbed fever he had tried to prevent. It took Pasteur's work to vindicate Semmelweis's observations. Through his research, Pasteur proved that microscopic organisms were indeed responsible for disease. He showed that these germs could be killed by heat, chemicals, and proper hygiene practices. But here's the shocking truth. This mistake still haunts modern medicine. How many times have you encountered healthcare workers who don't take proper precautions because they can't see the danger? How often do people ignore warnings about antibiotic-resistant bacteria because these threats seem abstract and invisible? You see this mistake every day. People who don't wash their hands properly, who don't complete their antibiotic courses, who ignore infection control measures because they can't see the microscopic enemies around them. The lesson for you is profound. Just because you can't see a threat doesn't mean it isn't real. The deadliest enemies are often invisible. In your own life, make sure you're taking proper precautions against unseen dangers. Whether it's practicing good hygiene, following medical protocols, or being vigilant about infection control. Mistake number 3. Rejecting evidence that challenges tradition. The third, and perhaps most dangerous mistake, was the stubborn refusal to accept new evidence when it challenged established beliefs. This mistake didn't just kill individuals, it killed entire generations. Imagine you're Louis Pasteur himself, standing before the French Academy of Sciences in 1864. You've just presented overwhelming evidence that spontaneous generation is false, that microorganisms cause disease, and that proper hygiene can save millions of lives. But instead of applause, you face ridicule and hostility. The medical establishment calls you a mere chemist who doesn't understand medicine. They dismiss your findings because they contradict centuries of accepted wisdom. They refuse to change their practices because admitting they were wrong would mean acknowledging that their own hands had been instruments of death. This resistance to change cost countless lives. For decades after Pasteur's discoveries, many doctors continued their deadly practices simply because they couldn't accept that their traditional methods were wrong. But here's what made Pasteur different. He didn't just present theories, he provided practical solutions. When the wine industry was suffering from spoilage, he developed the process we now call pasteurization. When silkworms were dying from disease, he identified the cause and provided a cure. When rabies threatened human lives, he created the first successful vaccine. Each time, Pasteur faced the same resistance. Each time, he persevered with evidence and practical results. And each time, his methods saved lives once they were finally accepted. Now, here's the crucial question for you. How often do you make this same mistake in your own life? How often do you reject new information simply because it challenges what you've always believed? How often do you stick with harmful habits or outdated practices because change feels uncomfortable? This mistake isn't just about medicine, it's about life itself. Maybe you're ignoring warning signs about your health because accepting them would mean changing your lifestyle. Maybe you're dismissing new research about nutrition, exercise, or mental health because it contradicts what you've always done. The lesson from Pasteur's struggle is clear. Truth doesn't care about tradition. Evidence doesn't bow to authority. And your willingness to accept new information and change your behavior accordingly could literally save your life. The modern relevance. Why these mistakes still matter. You might think these mistakes are ancient history, but they're more relevant to your life today than ever before. Let me show you how these same 3 deadly errors still threaten your health and safety. The spontaneous generation fallacy in modern times. You see this every day in how people think about their health. They believe problems just happen, without cause. That heart disease, diabetes, or cancer simply appear out of nowhere. They ignore the connections between their lifestyle choices and their health outcomes, treating diseases as if they spontaneously generate rather than result from specific causes. Ignoring the invisible enemy today. You witness this in the resistance to vaccination, the casual attitude toward antibiotic resistance, and the dismissal of mental health issues because they're not immediately visible. People make the same mistake doctors made in Pasteur's time. They minimize threats they can't see, rejecting evidence that challenges tradition. You encounter this whenever people refuse to accept new medical research because it contradicts what they've always believed. Whether it's about diet, exercise, treatment options, or preventive care, the same stubborn resistance to change continues to cost lives. The life-saving lessons from Pasteur's legacy. Here's what you need to understand about Louis Pasteur's true legacy. He didn't just discover germs, he discovered a way of thinking that can save your life. His approach to problem-solving, his insistence on evidence over tradition, and his willingness to challenge established beliefs created a framework that you can apply to your own health and safety. Lesson 1. Question everything, even experts. Pasteur taught us that expertise without evidence is dangerous. Don't accept medical advice simply because it comes from an authority figure. Ask questions, seek second opinions, and demand explanations. The doctor who refuses to answer your questions or explain their reasoning might be making the same mistakes that killed millions in Pasteur's era. Lesson 2. Look for patterns and connections. Pasteur's genius lay in seeing connections that others missed. He noticed that certain conditions led to disease while others prevented it. In your own life, pay attention to patterns. What makes you feel better or worse? What circumstances lead to problems or solutions? These observations could reveal important truths about your health. Lesson 3. Embrace change when evidence supports it. Perhaps most importantly, Pasteur showed us that changing our behavior based on new evidence isn't weakness. It's wisdom. If new research shows that something you're doing is harmful, or that there's a better way to protect your health, be willing to adapt. Your life could depend on it. The 3 questions that could save your life. Before we conclude, I want you to ask yourself 3 critical questions. Questions that emerge directly from Pasteur's battles against these deadly mistakes. Question 1. What invisible threats am I ignoring? Just as doctors in Pasteur's time couldn't see the germs that were killing their patients, what unseen dangers might you be overlooking? Are you ignoring the invisible effects of stress, poor sleep, environmental toxins, or unhealthy relationships? Remember, the deadliest enemies are often the ones you can't see. Question 2. What traditions am I following without question? What health practices, medical advice, or lifestyle choices are you maintaining simply because that's how it's always been done? Are you like the doctors who refuse to wash their hands because tradition told them their gentleman's hands were clean? Challenge your assumptions and be willing to change when evidence supports it. Question 3. What evidence am I rejecting because it's uncomfortable? This might be the most important question of all. What information about your health, your habits, or your risks are you dismissing because accepting it would require difficult changes? Remember, the medical establishment rejected Pasteur's findings not because they were wrong, but because they were uncomfortable to accept.